Before we begin, subscribe to Vesper Shroud. This channel is dedicated to true horror stories based on real reports from across the United States. Tonight, you'll hear 10 true horror stories from Pennsylvania. And every one of them actually happened. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and stay with us until the end. Story 1. Call from nowhere. Have you ever heard your own voice calling you from a place you standing? Have you ever felt that moment when everything you know about reality just breaks? This is the story of a woman who experienced something so terrifying, so impossible, that it changed how she understood the world forever. This is a true account of what happened to her in rural Pennsylvania, and I'm going to tell you exactly what she discovered that night. My name is Sarah, and I'm about to share something I kept secret for 3 years. Something that still wakes me up at 3 in the morning, gasping, unsure of what is real anymore. It was a Tuesday in March when everything started to unravel. I lived alone in a farmhouse outside of Clearfield, Pennsylvania, about 20 miles from the nearest town. The isolation never bothered me before. I actually craved it. My job as a remote software consultant meant I could work from anywhere. And after my divorce, I wanted anywhere to be far away from people. The house was perfect. Old, creaky, surrounded by thick pine forest on 3 sides. The kind of place where you could scream and nobody would hear you. I should have recognized that as a warning sign. That night started like any other. I was driving home from the grocery store around 9:30, passing through miles of dark highway. The forest pressed in close on both sides. My headlights cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and empty road. No other cars, no other signs of life. Just me and the sound of my engine, and underneath that, the unsettling quiet of rural Pennsylvania in early spring. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something wrong immediately. My front porch light was off. I always left that light on, not because I was afraid of the dark, but because it helped me see the house when I returned home. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at the dark opening of my front door. The house looked different without that light. It looked like it was watching me. That sounds crazy, I know, but that's the only way I can describe it. The house felt present, aware. I grabbed my groceries and headed inside, trying to ignore that creepy sensation crawling up my spine. The door unlocked easily. The alarm system was disarmed. I knew I had set it before I left. I was always careful about that. I stepped inside and flicked the light switch. Nothing happened. I stood in the darkness of my entryway, groceries clutched to my chest, listening. The house made its usual sounds. The furnace humming, the pipes settling, familiar sounds that suddenly felt sinister. I walked carefully through the kitchen, set the groceries down on the counter, and tried the light switch there. Still nothing. A power outage. That had to be it. It was probably just the grid. Pennsylvania experiences those sometimes. Except as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something that made my blood go cold. The digital clock on my stove was still lit. It showed 9:47 p.m. The microwave light was on. My laptop charger, sitting on the counter, had a small green light glowing. The power wasn't out. Only my lights were off. Every single light in that house had been turned off. I stood there in the darkness, and I felt something shift inside me. That creepy sensation from outside became something sharper, something more real. Someone had been in my house. Someone had systematically turned off every light. They might still be here. My phone was in my purse. I could call 911. I could get out of the house right now. But something stopped me. Curiosity. That stupid human instinct that makes us investigate the creaking noise instead of running away. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe a power surge had tripped all my circuits and the stove just had battery backup. Maybe my landlord had come by for some reason. Maybe. I walked through my house in the darkness, hands out in front of me like I was underwater. Every room I entered felt wrong. The air felt different, colder, more compressed somehow. I found my circuit breaker in the basement and shined my phone light on it. All the breakers were in the on position. Nothing had tripped. Everything was exactly as it should have been, except it wasn't. I went back upstairs and turned the hallway lights on. They worked immediately. Same with the living room, the kitchen. Every light in that house came back on like they had never been off at all. I stood in the suddenly bright kitchen, heart pounding, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. That's when my phone rang. The sound cut through the quiet house like a knife. I actually jumped, dropping my phone onto the counter. The caller ID showed my own number. I was calling myself. I stared at the screen, watching my own name glow in the darkness. My phone kept ringing, and I couldn't bring myself to touch it. After 4 rings, it went to voicemail. I waited, holding my breath. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. A new voicemail notification. I had a message from my own number. My hands were shaking as I pressed play. The voicemail was filled with sound. Not words, just sound. There was static, white noise, and underneath it something else. A breathing sound, wet and labored, like someone struggling for air. And something more, something that made my skin crawl with primal recognition. There were footsteps in my house. Heavy, deliberate footsteps crossing what sounded like my living room floor. The voicemail was only 15 seconds long, but in those 15 seconds, I could identify exactly where those footsteps were. Crossing from my front door toward the hallway. Toward the stairs. The timestamp on the voicemail was 3 hours ago. I had been at the store. I had been driving home. I had been nowhere near my house. I called the police immediately, told them everything. The officer who responded was a man named Detective Marcus Webb, local sheriff, this department. He arrived within 30 minutes and spent 2 hours searching my entire property. He checked every closet, every crawl space, every window and door. He even brought in a dog handler. There was nothing, no signs of breaking and entering, no one hiding in my basement, no evidence that anyone had ever been there. But the voicemail remained, the horrifying proof that something impossible had happened. Detective Webb listened to the voicemail 3 times. Each time, his face became darker, more unsettled. He wasn't a young cop. He had the tired eyes of someone who had seen a lot. But this was different. This rattled him. I'm going to be honest with you, he said, sitting at my kitchen table. I've been in law enforcement for 24 years. I've never heard anything like this. The sounds in that voicemail. My tech expert says the background noise matches this room. Your living room. The acoustic signature is identical, but there is no sign of forced entry. No sign of anyone being here. It doesn't make sense. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch with all the lights on, doors locked, my phone in my hand. Every sound the house made felt like a threat. Every creak in the floorboards felt like footsteps approaching from somewhere I couldn't see. Around 3 in the morning, I drove to a hotel in town and checked in under a different name. The next day, I returned to my house, and Detective Webb was already there with a forensic team. They dusted for fingerprints. They took samples from the locks. They examined the voicemail file on my phone, trying to trace where it had come from. Nothing led anywhere. The call had originated from my own phone number, but my phone had been in my purse at the store. The call log showed it was impossible. My phone had made an outgoing call to itself while I was 3 miles away. Over the next week, I experienced a descending nightmare that I can barely articulate even now. The calls continued, always from my own number, always late at night, always voicemails filled with sounds from inside my house. Sometimes just breathing and footsteps. Sometimes I could hear my kitchen cabinets opening and closing. Sometimes I heard my television turning on, the sound of a channel surfing through stations I never watched. Each voicemail felt like proof that something was happening in my house when I wasn't there. Something was using my house like a stage. The police couldn't explain it. The phone company couldn't explain it. My phone, this manufacturer sent a technician who couldn't explain it. I was being haunted by something that existed in the space between my presence and my absence. When I was home, it was silent. When I left, it started to move. I reached out to a paranormal investigator named Dr. Helen Morse, who had some notoriety in Pennsylvania. She came to my house and set up equipment, thermal cameras, EMF meters, sound recorders. She stayed for 2 nights, and on the second night, something extraordinary happened. An electromagnetic spike registering off the scale. Dr. Morse was sleeping in my guest room when the readings exploded on her equipment. She came running downstairs, and we stood together in the darkness of my living room, watching the meters go haywire. Then, in the dead silence of 3 in the morning, we heard it. The sound of someone walking through my house. Heavy footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, purposeful. Footsteps that belonged to something that weighed more than any human I'd ever known. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door where we were standing. Dr. Morse grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. We waited. The footsteps never resumed. Whatever it was standing just outside that door, separated from us by a few inches of wood and nothing else. It knows we re-listening, Dr. Morse whispered. It stopped because it knows we re-hear. That was the moment I understood something terrifying. This wasn't the haunting in the traditional sense. This was an Did a ghost or a spirit? This was something intelligent, something that was aware of me, something that moved through my house and thought about me, and the thought made it as still and silent as possible. Like a predator that knows it is being observed. I left that house for good the next morning. Sold it 3 months later at a significant loss to someone who didn't believe in any of this. I got a new phone number, moved to a different state, tried to put it behind me, but here is what still terrifies me. Years later, here is the thing that wakes me up at 3 in the morning, gasping in a cold sweat. Detective Webb never officially closed the case. 3 years later, he reached out to me. He told me something he should never have told me. Police in Clearfield County and in surrounding counties had received other calls. Calls with the same signature. Calls from people with own phone numbers containing sounds from their homes when those people were nowhere near those homes. It had been happening for at least 5 years. More than 40 reported cases. No investigation had produced any evidence. No case had been solved. And then Webb told me the most chilling part. In 17 of those 47 cases, the person who received the calls eventually disappeared. Gone without a trace. Their houses stood empty. No bodies were ever found. They simply vanished, leaving behind only that unsettling evidence that something had invaded their space, something that knew them, something that wanted them. I asked Detective Webb if my house, the one I had sold, was still occupied. He was quiet for a long time. No, he finally said. The family that bought it lasted 4 months. Then they left in the middle of the night. The house has been empty ever since. A realtor tried to sell it again, but nobody will stay. They all report the same thing. Calls from their own numbers. Sounds of footsteps when they re-alone. Something moving through the darkness of those rooms. I don't. You know what that thing is? I don't. You know why it calls itself? I don't. You know what it wants? But I know one thing with absolute certainty. It is still there. Still in that house in rural Pennsylvania. Still in that space between being and not being. Still calling out from the darkness of empty rooms. Leaving messages that prove something is moving through our world that we don't. Do you understand? Something that knows our voices. Something that can mimic the sound of our own presence. And the terrifying truth that keeps me awake is this. That thing that called me from my own phone. That impossible presence that filled my house with its footsteps and breath. I think it was calling me home. I think it was trying to get me to come back. And I genuinely don't. Do you know what would have happened if I had answered one of those calls? If I had picked up the phone and heard my own voice on the other end, speaking from somewhere inside my house where nothing could possibly be. Sometimes I wonder if there are people out there who did answer. People who heard their own voice calling from the darkness. I wonder what they heard. I wonder if they were still alive. And I wonder if it is still calling, still leaving messages in houses across Pennsylvania, still searching for the person who will finally answer. Still hunting for someone who will come home. Because here is what I've never told anyone until now. Last month, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voicemail was brief, just 10 seconds of white noise and breathing. But underneath that sound, at the edge of hearing, I could make out something else. My voice, speaking a single word into the darkness. A word I could barely hear but understood perfectly. Home. And the most horrifying part of all? I recognized the background noise. I recognized exactly where that call came from. It came from inside the new house I just bought. The one I moved into 3 weeks ago. The one I had been living in alone. The one I thought was finally safe. The calls started again last Tuesday. And I am still here. Still in the house. Still waiting to see what it wants. Still trying to convince myself there is a logical explanation. Still hoping that tomorrow morning everything will make sense. I don't think it will. I think the thing that lives in the spaces between my presence and my absence is finally getting what it wanted all along. It's getting me to stay. Story 2. Barn door. I never believed in evil until I inherited my uncle, this farm in rural Pennsylvania. That was 3 months ago. I still own the property. I just refused to go back after dark. The place sat 40 minutes outside Harrisburg, tucked between state forest and forgotten cornfields that hadn't been harvested in years. My uncle died alone in that farmhouse. Heart attack, they said. But when I arrived to clear out his things, I found something disturbing. Every window had thick curtains nailed directly into the wall frames. Not hung, nailed, like he was trying to keep something from looking inside. The neighbors were scattered, mostly elderly folks who kept to themselves. The nearest house was half a mile down a dirt road that turned to mud when it rained. Cell service was spotty, the kind of place where you could scream and nobody would hear you. Where being alone meant truly completely alone. I planned to spend 2 weeks there, sorting through decades of accumulated junk before putting the farm up for sale. The house was old but sturdy, built in the 1800s with thick stone walls and narrow doorways. It smelled like dust and something else, something organic and faintly rotten that I could never quite locate. The barn stood about 50 yards from the main house, a massive structure with weathered red paint peeling in long strips. My uncle had kept chickens and a few goats, but according to the lawyer handling the estate, the animals had been sold off months before his death. The barn should have been empty. On my first night, I noticed the motion sensor lights. They were installed all around the property, the industrial kind used for security. They seemed excessive for a rural farm until I realized how dark it got out there. Not city dark, not suburb dark, the kind of darkness that feels solid, that presses against your windows like something alive. I was unpacking in the kitchen when the first light triggered, the one facing the barn. Through the window, I watched it illuminate the weathered doors, the overgrown grass, the rusted farm equipment scattered in the yard. Nothing moved. After 30 seconds, the light clicked off. 5 minutes later, it happened again. Then again, and again. I told myself it was animals. Raccoons, maybe deer. The sensors were probably too sensitive. But something nagged at me. The light kept activating in the same spot, always aimed at the barn doors. Always the same duration, like something was standing there, waiting for the light to turn off before moving. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked and settled. Normal sounds for an old building. But around 2 in the morning, I heard something that wasn't normal. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling the house. Not the scurrying of an animal. The measured pace of something walking upright. I lay in bed, every muscle locked tight, listening to those footsteps make a complete circuit around the farmhouse. They moved from the front porch to the east side, then around to the back, then the west side, and finally back to the front. The entire loop took maybe 3 minutes. Then silence. My hand shook as I reached for the baseball bat I had placed beside the bed. I crept to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain my uncle had nailed there. The motion light was on, illuminating an empty yard. Nothing. Nobody. But the footsteps had been real. I knew what I heard. The next morning, I checked the security cameras my uncle had installed. 6 of them, covering every angle of the property. I pulled the footage from the night before, fast-forwarding to 2 a.m. The cameras showed nothing. Not a person, not an animal, not even one moving the grass. But on the audio track, clear as day, I could hear those slow footsteps circling the house. I should have left then. I know that now, but I was stubborn, rational. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the audio was picking up sounds from inside the house, echoing through the walls. Maybe my uncle had been paranoid in his old age, and I was feeding off that energy. I decided to check the barn. In daylight, it seemed less ominous. Just an old farm building that needed repairs. The doors were secured with a heavy padlock, which struck me as odd. Why lock an empty barn? I found the key hanging in the kitchen and walked across the yard. The lock was stiff, like it hadn't been opened in months. When the door finally swung inward, the smell hit me immediately. Not rot, not exactly. Something musty and animal, mixed with old hay and something metallic. The interior was dim despite the sunlight outside, shadows clinging to the corners like they didn't want to leave. Most of the barn was empty. A few bales of moldy hay, some rusted tools hanging on the walls. But in the back corner, I found something that made my skin crawl. Scratches, deep gouges in the wooden walls, running from floor to ceiling. Not random marks, they were concentrated around the corner, like something had been desperately trying to claw its way out. Or in. I backed away, suddenly very aware of how isolated I was. The barn felt wrong. The air was colder than it should be, and that smell was stronger toward the back. I left quickly, locking the door behind me. That afternoon, I drove into the nearest town to buy groceries. I mentioned the farm to the cashier, an older woman with suspicious eyes. Her expression changed when I said my uncle. His name. That place, she said quietly, glancing around like she didn't want to be overheard. Animals won to go near that barn after dark. Haven, for years. Your uncle stopped keeping livestock because they panic every sunset. Chickens would die from stress rather than roost in there. I asked her what she meant. She shook her head. Some places got bad history. That land? Something happened there a long time ago. Before the farm, before the house. Your uncle knew. Why do you think he lived alone all those years? She wouldn't say more, just handed me my change and looked away. The second night was worse. The motion lights started at dusk, clicking on and off in sequence like something was moving between them. I watched from the window as each light activated, tracking a path from the tree line to the barn. But the cameras showed nothing. At midnight, the footsteps returned. Slower this time, more deliberate. They circled the house twice, stopping at each window as if checking to see if I was watching. I was paralyzed in bed, barely breathing, listening to those impossibly slow steps pause directly outside my window. Then I heard something that turned my blood to ice. A slow, scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across the glass. Not frantic, patient, testing. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but there was no signal. The Wi-Fi was out too. I was alone in that house with something outside, something that knew I was there and wasn't in any hurry. The scraping stopped. The footsteps resumed, completing their circuit and fading into silence. I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with every light on, the baseball bat across my lap, watching the security monitors. Around 3 a.m., all 6 cameras went dark simultaneously. Not dead batteries. They just switched off like someone had cut the power. But the lights in the house stayed on. When the cameras came back online 5 minutes later, I reviewed the footage. 5 minutes of pure static. But the audio had recorded something. Breathing. Deep, wet breathing right next to the camera mounted on the barn. The next morning, I packed my essentials and decided to leave. I'd hire someone to clear the house, sell the property as is, whatever it took. I wasn't spending another night there, but my truck wouldn't start. The battery was completely dead, which made no sense because it had been fine the day before. I tried jumping it with the old tractor in the barn, but the tractor was dead too. Every vehicle on the property, drained. I was trapped. I called a tow service from the landline, but they couldn't come until the next day. The nearest service was 2 hours away, and they were already backed up. I begged them to hurry, tried to explain, but how do you tell someone that something is stalking you without sounding insane? That day lasted forever. I kept the doors locked, windows covered. I pulled more footage from previous nights, going back weeks before my uncle died. What I found made me sick. Every night, the same pattern. Lights triggering, footsteps circling, cameras cutting out. But there was one night, about a week before my uncle's death, where something different happened. The barn doors were open. I could see them on camera, swinging slowly in wind that didn't move anything else. And in the darkness inside that barn, something moved. The footage was grainy, but I could make out a shape. Tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. It stood in the barn doorway for almost an hour, completely still, just watching the house. My uncle had died of a heart attack, but I wondered, as I watched that thing in his barn, what exactly he had seen that stopped his heart. The sunset. The lights began their sequence. I heard the footsteps starting their slow circuit, but this time they didn't stop. They came directly to the front door. 3 slow knocks, deliberate, almost polite. I stood frozen in the kitchen, every instinct screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The knocking came again. 3 measured strikes that rattled the old wood. Then silence. I crept to the window and looked out through a gap in the curtain. The porch was empty, but the barn doors were open, swinging slowly despite the still air. And I realized with horrible certainty that whatever had been in the barn was now outside the house. The footsteps circled again, but faster now. Urgent. The motion lights blazed in sequence as something moved around the property with inhuman speed. I grabbed my phone, but still no signal. The landline was dead. I was about to break a window and run for the road when the footsteps stopped. Everything stopped. The lights, the sounds, even the normal creaking of the house went silent. Then I heard it, from inside the house, from upstairs, the slow, patient footsteps of something that had already gotten in. I grabbed the baseball bat and threw open the front door, running into the night. The cold air hit me like a wall as I sprinted across the yard toward the road. Behind me, I heard the farmhouse door slam. I ran harder than I'd ever run, not looking back, my lungs burning in the freezing air. The dirt road seemed to stretch forever in the darkness, but I kept moving, driven by pure terror. I made it to the neighbor's house half a mile away and pounded on their door until an old man answered, shotgun in hand. I must have looked insane, covered in sweat, babbling about footsteps and barns and things that shouldn't exist. He let me in, made some calls. The police came and checked the farmhouse. They found nothing unusual, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone being there. The security footage from that night was corrupted, showing only static. But they found one thing that nobody could explain. Every door in the house was wide open. Every window, every cabinet and closet, all standing open like something had been searching for where I'd be hidden. I never went back. I sold the property to a development company for half its value. They were going to tear down the house and barn, build something new. I told them about the history, warned them about what happened. They smiled and nodded like I was just another superstitious seller trying to explain away a quick sale. Sometimes I wonder if they started work yet, if their construction crews have noticed anything strange, if their equipment keeps dying for no reason, if they heard the footsteps. But mostly I wonder about my uncle, living there for 40 years, alone with whatever walked his land at night. I wonder what kept him there when he could have left at any time. What understanding he reached with the thing in his barn. Because I found something else before I left, hidden in his bedroom drawer. A journal with a single entry repeated on every page, written in shaking handwriting. Keep the barn locked. Never open the door after dark. As long as the door stays closed, it stays inside. But I opened that door. I'd gone inside in daylight, broken whatever seal my uncle had maintained. And now I think about that tall shape in the barn doorway, standing there watching the house, waiting decades for someone to finally let it out. The development company called yesterday. Construction delays, they said. Equipment problems. Workers refusing to stay after sunset. They asked if I knew anything about the property, its history. I told them I didn't. I told them everything was fine when I was there. Some lies are kinder than the truth. If these stories already feel unsettling, make sure you're subscribed to Vesper Shroud. We publish true horror stories based on real events, real locations, and real people. And the stories ahead only get darker. Story 3. Footprints that shouldn't exist. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in that house. I am not someone who believes in ghosts. They walked through hundreds of empty properties, stood alone in basements with broken windows and peeling paint, and never once felt anything but boredom and the smell of mildew. But what I found in that Pennsylvania farmhouse last October changed everything I thought I knew about fear. The property had been sitting empty for 17 years. 17 years of Pennsylvania winters. Of pipes freezing and floors rotting. Of nature slowly reclaiming what man had built. The owner had died without heirs, and the state finally decided to demolish it. My job was simple. Walk through, document everything, make sure nobody had been squatting there, then clear it for the bulldozers. A Tuesday morning task. Nothing special, nothing scary. I pulled up the gravel driveway at 9:30. The October sun was already high, but the light seemed to stop at the tree line surrounding the property. The house itself sat in perpetual shadow, a two-story colonial with white paint that had turned the color of old bones. Every window was dark, every curtain was drawn. The porch sagged in the middle like a broken spine. The air was wrong. That's the first thing I noticed when I stepped out of my car. It was too still. No birds, no wind, just silence that felt thick enough to touch. They've been doing this job for 12 years, and they learned to trust my instincts. Everything in my body was screaming at me to get back in the car and leave. But I had a job to do, and I've never been the type to let fear make my decisions. The front door was unlocked, standard procedure for abandoned properties scheduled for demolition. I pushed it open, and it swung inward without a sound, which was unsettling in itself. Old hinges should creak, they should groan. This door moved like it had been oiled yesterday. The inside smelled like decay and something else I couldn't identify. Something sweet and wrong. The foyer opened into a living room on the left, a dining room on the right, with a staircase leading up to the second floor straight ahead. Everything was covered in dust. Thick, undisturbed dust that coated every surface like gray snow. 17 years of abandonment will do that. The furniture was still there, covered in white sheets that had turned yellow with age. Family photos still hung on the walls, faces I would never know staring out from behind cracked glass. I pulled out my phone to start taking pictures for the report. That is when I saw them. Footprints. Fresh, wet footprints crossing the dusty floor from the front door to the basement entrance at the back of the house. My blood went cold. These weren't the old marks. They weren't the dried traces of some urban explorer from weeks ago. They were wet. They glistened in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. And they were shaped like bare feet, adult-sized, leading in a straight line through the living room, past the covered furniture, directly to the basement door. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just staring, my mind trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe there was a leak. Maybe water had dripped from somewhere and created a pattern that only looked like footprints. But the ceiling was dry, the walls were dry, and the prints were too perfect, too clearly defined. 5 toes, an arch, a heel. Someone had walked through this house with wet, bare feet. The rest of the floor was completely undisturbed. The dust lay thick everywhere except where those footprints cut through it like a path through fresh snow. No other marks, no disturbance, just those prints, leading to the basement. I should have left. Every instinct I had was telling me to walk back out that door, get in my car, and tell the state to send someone else. But I'm stubborn. I am practical, and some dark part of my brain needed to know, needed to understand. So I followed the footprints. They led me through the living room, past a couch with indentations where someone had sat for so many years that the shape remained even beneath the sheet. They led past the kitchen doorway, where I could see a table still set for a meal that had never been eaten. They led right up to the basement door. The door was closed. The footprints stopped at the threshold, wet marks pooling slightly where someone had stood, waiting. The doorknob was old brass, tarnished green with age. I reached for it, and my hand was shaking. It was cold. Not just cool, but freezing. Cold enough that it almost burned my palm. I turned it, and the door opened easily, revealing stairs descending into darkness. The wet footprints continued down, disappearing into the black. I found a light switch on the wall. Flipped it. Nothing happened. The power had been cut years ago. I pulled out my phone, activated the flashlight, and pointed it down the stairs. The beam only penetrated about 10 feet before the darkness seemed to swallow it whole. The footprints gleamed wetly on each step, leading down. The air coming up from the basement was cold and damp, and it carried that sweet, wrong smell I noticed when I first entered. Stronger now, almost overpowering. I started down the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. My phone light swept back and forth, illuminating stone walls coated in moisture and mold. The footprints kept going, step after step after step. They were still wet, still fresh, like whoever made them had just walked down seconds before I arrived. Halfway down the stairs, my phone flickered. The light dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again. The battery was at 73%. There was no reason for it to malfunction, but the light kept flickering, and with each flicker, I thought I saw something at the bottom of the stairs. A shape, a shadow that didn't move like shadows should move. I kept going. I don't know why. Fear had turned into something else, something darker. A need to see, a need to know. The basement was larger than I expected. My phone light revealed a space that stretched beyond what the house, this foundation should have allowed. Stone floor, stone walls, and there, in the center of the room, was a door. Not a door frame, not a door in a wall, just a door standing upright in the middle of the empty basement, connected to nothing. It was made of dark wood, so old it looked black, and it had a brass handle that matched the one upstairs. The wet footprints led right up to it and stopped. On this side of the door, I walked closer, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The air was freezing now. I could see my breath forming clouds in the beam of my phone. The door was easily 7 feet tall, covered in carvings I couldn't make out in the dim light. They looked like symbols, like writing in a language I'd never seen. I reached out to touch it. The wood was warm. In a basement where my breath was fogging the air, the door was warm like human skin. I jerked my hand back, and that was when I heard it. Footsteps above me, slow, deliberate, walking across the living room floor directly over my head, the same floor I just crossed. The floor covered in undisturbed dust except for those wet footprints that led down here. My heart stopped. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. The footsteps moved toward the basement door. I could hear them clearly, each step sending a tiny shower of dust down from the ceiling onto my shoulders. They reached the door, stopped, then the basement door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. My phone light flickered again, and in that flicker, I saw something that made my mind fracture. The freestanding door in the center of the basement was open. Just a crack, and from that crack came light. Warm, yellow light like lamplight, and that smell, that sweet wrong smell, was pouring out of it. I ran for the stairs in complete darkness because my phone had died, just went black in my hand like someone had flipped a switch. I slammed into the stone wall, felt my way along it, found the stairs by touch. I climbed them in the dark, my hand scraping against the rough wood of the railing, my feet slipping on steps I couldn't see. Behind me, I heard the freestanding door creak open wider. I heard something step through it, something that breathed in wet, rattling gasps. I reached the basement door and grabbed the handle. It wouldn't turn. I pulled, I pushed, I threw my whole weight against it. The door was locked from the other side, from inside the house, but I had left it open. I knew I had left it open. The breathing was getting closer, coming up the stairs behind me, slow and steady and so terrifyingly patient. I could feel hot air on the back of my neck. I could smell that sweetness, and underneath it, rot. The smell of something that should be dead but wasn't. I screamed. I threw myself against the door with everything I had, and suddenly it opened. I fell forward into the living room, into the dust and the gray light, and I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I ran through that house and out the front door and across the gravel to my car, and I drove away so fast the tires screamed. I called the state office from a gas station 20 miles away. Told them the property was unsafe. Structural issues. They could tear it down without an interior inspection. I signed off on the paperwork remotely. I never went back. But here, it's the thing that keeps me awake at night. The thing that makes me question everything. 2 days after I fled that house, they bulldozed it, tore it down to the foundation. And when they did, they found the basement. It was empty. Just a normal basement. Stone walls, stone floor. No door standing in the center. No carvings, no symbols, just an empty room. But they found something else. Something the demolition crew didn't report officially, but that leaked out through local gossip. In the corner of the basement, beneath years of dust, they found 17 sets of footprints. Bare feet, adult-sized, all leading to the center of the room where my freestanding door had been. All leading to nothing. And all of them were still wet. I quit real estate 3 weeks later. Started working from home, doing consulting. I don't to go into empty houses anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up and smell something sweet and wrong. And I hear footsteps on the floor above me, even though I live in a one-story house. Even though I know I'm alone, I check the floor every morning now, looking for wet footprints, looking for proof that what followed me out of that basement is still here, still walking through my life. So far, I haven't found any, but the smell is getting stronger. Story 4. Road that remembers. I'm going to tell you about the scariest night of my life. The kind of night that changes you. The kind of night you never talk about because nobody believes you. But I need to tell someone, and maybe you'll understand what happened to me on that creepy Pennsylvania highway better than anyone else. I was driving home from Pittsburgh at 2 in the morning. Bad decision. Worst choice of route. Route 17 cuts through the darkest part of rural Pennsylvania you can find. Just miles and miles of black forest on both sides, telephone poles stretching into nothing, and the kind of darkness that makes you feel like you're the only person left on Earth. My headlights didn't even seem real out there. They just cut into the void and disappeared. The road was empty, completely empty. But something felt wrong. Something felt watching. I know how that sounds. I am a normal guy. I work in sales. I've driven this road maybe 50 times before. But that night, my hands were tight on the wheel. My heart was beating too fast. My skin felt cold even though the heat was up. Fear was creeping into my chest like frost spreading across a window. Then I saw him, standing on the side of the road, motionless, just standing there at a curve, maybe 100 yards ahead. My first thought was that someone had broken down. My second thought was that this was unsettling in a way I couldn't explain. The figure didn't move. He didn't wave. He didn't turn his head as my headlights swept across him. He just stood there, waiting. Even now, I can see him clearly in my mind. Tall, impossibly still. No jacket despite the freezing night. His face was dark, covered. I couldn't make out any features. Nothing. Just a shape that looked almost human but wasn't quite right. The proportions were off somehow. The way he stood was wrong. Nobody stands like that. My instinct screamed at me to slow down. My rational mind said maybe he needed help. But that terrifying feeling in my gut, that primitive fear that runs deeper than thought, told me something different. It told me that man was dangerous. That whatever he was not someone who needed help. I made a choice that probably saved my life. I didn't slow down. Instead, I accelerated. My foot hit the gas and my car jumped forward, eating up the distance between us. 70, 80 miles per hour, on a dark curve. Insane, dangerous, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to get past him. I had to get away from that horrifying, motionless figure. As I got closer, something even more unsettling happened. He turned his head, slowly, deliberately, to face me, even though I couldn't see his face, even though everything was darkness where his features should be. I felt his attention lock onto my car. I felt him watching me. The fear in my chest turned to pure, crystalline terror. In that moment, I understood something ancient and horrible. This man-shaped nightmare standing alone on a Pennsylvania road at 2 a.m, was not human. Could not be human. The wrongness of it crashed over me like ice water. My hands shook. I wanted to scream. I swerved hard. My tires squealed against the asphalt. I nearly lost control. The nightmare shape receded in my side mirror, standing perfectly still facing the direction my car had gone. Still watching, even as I flew past and away into the darkness. My heart hammered in my chest. My breath came in panic gasps. I couldn't stop shaking. I kept the accelerator pressed down, racing through the dark, expecting at any second to see him standing on the road ahead of me again. This is what haunting terror feels like. This is what it means to feel hunted. I drove that way for 15 miles, terrified, gasping, checking my mirrors constantly. No sign of him, just endless black road and darker forest. The horrifying reality of what I had seen began to sink in. What was that thing? Was it real? Did I actually see that? But I knew, deep in my bones, I knew what I had seen was real. Then I started hearing stories. I couldn't help it. The next day, I was too shaken to do my job properly. I went to a diner near the highway and mentioned to the waitress that I had a strange experience on Route 17. Her face went pale. She grabbed my arm and told me I needed to hear what others had experienced on that road. Over the next week, I gathered their testimonies. Drivers, truckers, people just passing through, all with nearly identical stories. A man standing on the side of Route 17, always at that same curve, always at night, always motionless, all of them reporting the same creepy, overwhelming sense that something was profoundly wrong with what they were seeing. A state trooper told me that there had been unusual tire marks on that section of road. Multiple swerve patterns. Multiple drivers had lost control. Multiple incidents where skid marks showed vehicles veering suddenly into the other lane or off the road entirely. Some accidents, some injuries, but the scariest detail was this. When police investigated, they found no sign of anyone on that road. No body, no person, nothing. The scariest part came when an old man at the diner told me something that made the blood drain from my face. This had been happening for years, decades, even, since at least the 1970s. Long before I was born, the man standing on the road was a local legend, something that truckers whispered about, something that old-timers remembered from their youth. And he never changed, never aged. The descriptions from people in the 70s matched the descriptions from people in the 21st century. Same height, same impossibly perfect stillness, same overwhelming wrongness. One trucker told me he hit him, couldn't swerve in time, felt the impact, heard something terrible that he couldn't describe, pulled over, shaking, and climbed out to see what he hit. But there was nothing there, no body, no blood, no evidence of impact, just an empty, terrifying road. I started researching local history, old newspapers, anything I could find, and I discovered something that made everything worse. In 1963, a man named David Marsh disappeared from a small town near that curve. He was a psychiatric patient. Dangerous, they said. Violent. He escaped from a hospital. They found his body 3 weeks later, hanging from a bridge near Route 17. Suicide, they ruled, though there were questions about the rope, about the angle, about how someone could have tied such knots while hanging. The newspapers from that time described him. Tall, very thin, an unusual gait. People said there was something off about him. Something wrong with the way he moved. Something wrong with his presence. Could it be him? Was I seeing a ghost? A residual haunting? Something worse? But then I read something that changed everything. A woman named Sarah Reeves reported in 1998 that she had seen the man standing on the road. She crashed trying to avoid him. Her car flipped. She survived, but barely. She spent years in therapy trying to convince herself it wasn't too real. But before she died in 2015, she gave an interview to a paranormal podcast where she said something terrifying. She said that in the moment before impact, as her car was flipping, she saw something in the road ahead. Another version of the man, then another, and another, an infinite line of them, stretching into the darkness, all identical, all standing motionless, all watching her. She never drove that road again. I've been thinking about that story constantly. I've been thinking about what I saw. I've been thinking about what might be standing on that Pennsylvania highway on any night, waiting for cars to approach, waiting for drivers to swerve and crash. And I realized something that fills me with a different kind of terror. I've driven past that spot 4 times since that night. I do it deliberately now during the day, looking for signs, looking for answers. And I noticed something disturbing. The curve seems longer than I remember. The road seems to curve back on itself in ways that don't quite match my memory. There is a ditch on the right side that I don't remember from before. And there are older tire marks in the gravel. Very old. Dozens of them. Hundreds maybe. All of them from vehicles that swerved. All of them from people trying to avoid something standing on that road. Last month, I drove past at night again. I wasn't planning to. I had taken a different road home from Pittsburgh, but I got confused, took a wrong turn, and suddenly I was back on Route 17. Suddenly I was approaching that curve. My heart jumped into my throat. My hands went numb. And there he was, standing in exactly the same place. But something was different this time. He was closer to the road, closer than before, like he was moving, like over the months and years, he was slowly getting closer to the pavement, slowly moving into the path of traffic. I didn't slow down to observe him this time. I hit the accelerator and flew past him, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. In my peripheral vision, I saw him turn to face me. I saw his head follow my car as I passed. And I heard something, even with the windows up and the engine roaring. I heard something. A sound like a voice, but not using words, just a kind of horrible, empty wailing. A sound that was wrong in every way that the figure standing on the road was wrong. A sound that meant hunger, meant longing, meant something that has been standing on that road for more than 50 years, waiting for one car to not swerve in time. I thought about reporting this, telling someone official, but who would believe me? What would I tell them? That there is a ghost or a demon or an impossible thing standing on a Pennsylvania highway. They think I was insane. And maybe I am, but I'm telling you this because you need to know. If you drive Route 17 at night, if you see him standing there, if you feel that creepy, horrifying sensation that something is fundamentally wrong with the universe at that moment, don't swerve, because I thought about what that woman said, about the infinite line of figures stretching into the darkness, and I thought about the sound I heard, that empty, hungry wailing, and I realized the scariest thing of all. Maybe he is trying to show us something. Maybe he is not hungry for a collision. Maybe he is trying to pull us somewhere else, somewhere that exists alongside our road, but isn't quite the same. Maybe every person who crashes on that curve doesn't die. Maybe they just end up standing somewhere else on a different road, with another driver approaching, waiting for that driver to swerve, waiting to see if they might finally leave. I haven't driven Route 17 since that night. I started taking the long way around, an extra 2 hours each trip. But I don't care, because I know what is waiting there. I know what has been patient and motionless for 50 years. And I know that eventually, someone is going to be tired. Someone is going to not swerve. Someone is going to hit him head on. And I don't want to know what happens then. I don't want to know if he falls down or if the car just passes through him. I don't want to know if there is really an infinite line of versions standing in the darkness. I don't want to know what happens to drivers who don't escape. But I'm terrified that I'm going to find out anyway. Because something tells me that one day, no matter how careful I am, no matter what route I take, I'm going to find myself on that road again at 2 in.m. And he is going to be closer than before, close enough to touch the windshield, close enough that swerving won't matter. This is what they learned. Pennsylvania holds secrets, dark, unsettling secrets that don't follow the rules of our world. And somewhere in the state, these forgotten corners, in the spaces between the headlights and the darkness, there are things waiting. Impossible, disturbing, terrifying things that have been waiting a very long time. And one night, they will be waiting for you too. Story 5, Knocking at 217. Listen, I need to tell you what happened to me in Pennsylvania because no one else will believe it, and I cannot keep this terrifying secret locked inside my mind any longer. What I experienced was not something out of a Hollywood film or a creepy internet story. This was real. This happened to me. And the most horrifying part is that it is still happening to others. My name is David. I am 52 years old. I work in insurance, and I have lived a completely normal, unremarkable life. I have a mortgage, a wife named Sarah of 28 years, and a dog named Max. I am not a person who believes in ghosts or supernatural nonsense. I am the kind of guy who watches documentaries about forensics and rolls his eyes at paranormal shows. But what I witnessed in that house outside of Millersport, Pennsylvania changed everything I thought I knew about reality itself. It started with a good deal. Sarah and I had been searching for a rental cabin for a long time. We wanted a place to escape the noise and chaos of our daily lives. We found this property online, hidden deep in the woods about 40 minutes from the nearest town. The photograph showed a beautiful old Victorian home, painted white, with black shutters and a wide wraparound porch. The listing was surprisingly cheap for such a large property, which should have been my first warning sign. But I did not think about it. I was too excited about getting away. We arrived on a Friday evening in late October. The autumn air was crisp and clean, and the trees surrounding the house were painted in shades of orange and red and brown. As I pulled the car down the long gravel driveway, the house seemed to grow larger, more imposing. It loomed against the darkening sky like something watching us approach. Sarah gripped my hand. She felt it too, that unsettling sensation that something was off about this place. But we were here now. We had paid the deposit. We decided to go inside and settle in for the night. The house was colder than I expected. The owners had left the heat on, but the temperature inside was still frigid, almost as if the walls themselves rejected warmth. Our footsteps echoed across hardwood floors. Every room seemed to stretch on longer than it should have. The furniture was old but well maintained, covered with dust that suggested no one had lived here in quite some time. This was unsettling. According to the listing, the house had been rented out regularly. Yet everything about it felt abandoned, forgotten, frozen in time. We unpacked slowly, speaking in quiet voices without realizing we were doing it. Sarah kept commenting on small things, the way the curtains hung, how the radiators hissed and clanked. She was nervous. I could feel her anxiety creating a creepy atmosphere that made my skin prickle with discomfort. I suggested we watch television to ease the tension, to fill the silence. We found nothing but static and old reruns on most channels. We settled on an old movie and tried to relax. Around midnight, I suggested we try to sleep. Sarah agreed, though I could tell she was dreading the darkness upstairs. We climbed to the second floor and found the master bedroom. It was decorated in faded floral patterns and thick burgundy curtains that blocked out all light from the windows outside. Sarah fell asleep almost immediately, her body exhausted from the drive and the emotional weight of being in this strange place. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the house settle around us. The noises were strange. Old houses make sounds, I told myself. They creak and groan as the temperature drops at night. But these sounds felt deliberate somehow, almost like footsteps moving through the rooms below. I checked my phone. It was 1:53 in the morning. I told myself to stop being paranoid and close my eyes. At 2:17, the knocking began. It was not a violent, aggressive knocking. It was methodical and deliberate. Knock, 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 pause, knock, 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 like something trying to find the right rhythm, learning how to knock for the first time. Sarah jolted awake beside me. Her hand found mine in the darkness. "What is that?" she whispered. I did not answer because I did not know. The knocking continued, coming from downstairs, from the front door. My heart began to race. It was 2:17 in the morning. Who would be knocking on a door in the middle of the night at a rental property hidden in the woods? "Stay here," I told her, though my voice betrayed my fear. I grabbed my phone and its flashlight and made my way downstairs. The knocking stopped as soon as my feet touched the first floor. Silence. Dead silence. My breath came in short bursts. I moved toward the front door, my phone raised before me like a weapon. I could see the porch light on outside, casting a pale yellow glow across the front entrance. I checked the security camera footage. Sarah and I had reviewed the security system when we arrived, making sure we knew how to use it. I pulled up the app on my phone with shaking hands. The front porch camera showed something that made my blood turn to ice. There was a child standing just outside the edge of the porch light. I could not see the face clearly, The child existed in that shadowy space between light and darkness, where the illumination from the porch light faded into absolute blackness. I could make out a small form, what appeared to be pajamas, a pale hand. But the face remained obscured by shadow. The child was standing perfectly still, not moving, not knocking anymore. Just waiting. My instinct was to look out the window beside the door. I did not. Instead, I called for the police and told them about the intruder while standing in the middle of my living room. But something made me keep watching the security camera footage. I watched the timestamp on the video. 2:17, 2:18, 2:19. The child simply stood there in the darkness, waiting. Then something happened that I still cannot explain. The footage became distorted, not pixelated like when a camera loses signal, but strange, like the video was being corrupted in real time. Colors inverted and inverted again. For just a moment, I could see the child's face clearly, illuminated by some internal light. And what I saw in that brief instant was not human. The footage cut out completely at 2:22. When the police arrived 30 minutes later, they found nothing. No child on the porch, no footprints in the dirt or gravel, no signs of anyone having been near the house. They checked the security system thoroughly. The camera had a simple malfunction, they said. The hard drive had corrupted files. It happened sometimes with older systems. They suggested we relax and get some sleep. But I did not relax. I spent the rest of the night watching through windows, staring into the darkness beyond the porch light. Sarah lay upstairs, too terrified to sleep. We both knew something was horrifyingly wrong, but we could not prove it. The police would not believe us. They would think we were crazy. The next morning, I called the property owners. I told them about what happened and asked about the history of the house. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then the owner, his voice came back, quieter than before. "You experienced the knocking," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," I replied. At 2:17 exactly. I was not prepared for what he told me next. "This house," he said, "had a terrifying history. In 1987, a child had gone missing from this property. A young girl named Emma, only 8 years old. She had been visiting with her family for the weekend. On Friday night, after everyone had gone to bed, she simply vanished. The police searched for weeks. They dredged the nearby creek. They brought in dogs and helicopters and search teams. But Emma was never found. The case went cold within a year, but the family that had been renting the house at the time reported strange occurrences before Emma disappeared. They said there had been knocking on the door at 2:17 in the morning. When they checked, no one was there. The very next night, Emma was gone. Since then, the owner said, dozens of families had rented the house. Most stayed for only one night. They all reported the same thing. The knocking at exactly 2:17. The figure just outside the porch light. The footage on the security camera cutting out right as someone approached the door. I felt sick. Sarah and I were not unique. We were not special. We were simply the latest victims of whatever nightmare lived in that house. The owner told me that he had called the police many times. They had investigated, found nothing, and chalked it up to pranksters or malfunctioning equipment. No one wanted to believe what was actually happening. That night, the knocking came again. This time I was ready for it. I did not answer. I did not even look out the window. I sat in the darkness of the living room and watched the security camera footage on my phone. The child was there again, standing just outside the light, but something was different. The child, his head was turned, looking directly at the camera. Or at me. I could not tell which. The child, its mouth was opening and closing, as if trying to speak or perhaps trying to scream. But there was no sound. The child's movements became more animated. The small hands began to move. Not in a natural way. They moved at angles that made my stomach turn with nauseating horror. The child, its body twisted in ways that human bodies cannot twist. Then, like before, the footage corrupted and cut out. I realized something terrifying that night. The knocking was not random. It was not meaningless. The child, or whatever was pretending to be a child, was trying to communicate. It was trying to get someone to open that door. And I began to understand why the owner had been so reluctant to rent out the property at a low price. He was not looking for money. He was trying to get someone to come to this house. He was trying to get someone to let the thing in. I packed our bags before dawn. Sarah did not question me. She was already terrified beyond words. We drove away from that house as the sun was rising, and neither of us has spoken about returning to Pennsylvania since that night. But here's the part that keeps me awake. The part that makes this truly terrifying and not just some creepy story to tell at parties. 3 days after we left, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. When I answered, I heard nothing but silence and the sound of knocking. Knock, knock, knock. The caller ID said the call was coming from inside the house we had just left. I have not answered my phone with an unknown number since. I have blocked every number I could identify. But the calls keep coming. Always at 2:17 in the morning. Always from that house in Pennsylvania. Always with the sound of knocking in the background. 2 weeks ago, Sarah finally worked up the courage to ask me something that has been haunting her. When I was watching the security camera that final night, when the child's body was twisted in that horrible way, when the footage was cutting in and out, she asked me what I saw when the image cleared for just an instant. I told her the truth. I told her that when I could finally see the child's face clearly, it was not the face of a child at all. It was ancient. It was wrong. The mouth was too wide. The eyes were too dark. The skin seemed to exist in multiple places at once, as if reality itself could not quite hold the shape of whatever was standing on that porch. But the most horrifying part, the part that has destroyed my sense of safety in the world, was that the child was smiling at me. It was smiling because it knew I had seen it, and now it was looking for me. I moved my family across the country. I changed our phone number. I started sleeping with lights on in every room. But nothing has stopped it. The knocking continues, not always at my door, not always at 2:17. But I know it is coming for me. It is only a matter of time. And the worst part, the thing that terrifies me most, is that I have started to recognize the knocking. I have started to almost anticipate it. And I fear that one night, when I hear that familiar sound, I will find myself walking down the stairs before I can stop myself. I will find myself reaching for the door handle, and I will not be able to resist the urge to let whatever is out there finally come inside. That is what happened to me in Pennsylvania. That is what I have learned. The thing that knocked at 2:17 in the morning was not trying to take someone away. It was trying to invite itself in. And once it makes that connection, once it sees your face and knows who you are, it never stops knocking. Listen for the knocking in your house tonight. 2:17 is not just a time anymore. It is a doorway. It is a moment when the barrier between our world and something else becomes thin and permeable. It is when things that should not exist can almost touch us. And somewhere in Pennsylvania, in that old Victorian house painted white with black shutters, something is still standing on the porch. Still waiting, still knocking, still smiling. The knocking never stops. It only waits for someone to answer. Story 6. Woods behind the house. At 11:47 p.m., every single night, something starts calling from the forest behind my house. It has been calling for 4 months now. It never varies. It never stops. And every time I try to record it, the audio file destroys itself before I can save it. I am telling you this because I need someone to know. I need someone to understand what is happening here in rural Pennsylvania. And I need them to know before it is too late. My name is David, and I am about to describe the most terrifying, unsettling experience of my life. My family and I moved to a property outside of Millersport, Pennsylvania, about 40 minutes from any real town, back in November. The house sat on 14 acres of dense forest. Dense doesn't to even begin to describe it. The woods pressed in close on all sides, dark and thick, with trees so old they had probably been standing since before this country existed. When I first saw the property listing, I loved it. Perfect isolation for someone like me who works in tech and needs quiet. My wife loved the price. My 2 kids, Emma and Marcus, loved the idea of adventure and exploring nature. We all thought we were making the right decision. We were so wrong. The first strange thing happened on our 3rd night in the house. I was lying in bed, just drifting off to sleep, when I heard it. A sound coming from outside. A rhythmic, pulsing sound that wasn't quite a thump and wasn't quite a tone. It was something in between. Something that made my primitive brain recognize immediately that this was not a normal sound. This was not an animal. This was not wind through the trees. This was something deliberate, something intentional, something calling. I got up and went to the window. The forest was black, absolute black. My outdoor lights barely penetrated the edge of the tree line, and beyond that was nothing but darkness. The sound continued, that eerie, rhythmic pulsing coming from somewhere deep in that blackness. I estimated it was coming from maybe 200 yards out, past the clearing around the house, deep into the woods. My wife, Jennifer, woke up. She asked what I was doing standing at the window in the dark. I told her I was listening to something. She listened for a moment, then said she didn't hear anything. But I could hear it, clear as day. That creepy, deliberate pulsing that made the hair on my arms stand up. The sound stopped at exactly midnight. I got back in bed and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I told myself it was an animal, some kind of bird or insect making a rhythmic call. Nature was full of strange noises. That's what you got when you live this far out in the country. That's what I told myself. Anyway, the next night, at exactly 11:47 p.m., the sound started again. I was ready for it this time. I had my phone in my hand. The moment the terrifying, pulsing call began, I hit record. The sound came through clearly on my phone, this microphone. That eerie, rhythmic tone that somehow didn't quite sound like anything nature could produce. I recorded for 13 minutes while the calling continued, uninterrupted and unwavering. At exactly midnight, it stopped, just like the night before. I thought I had captured something. I thought I had evidence of something rare, something unusual, something that science might want to study. I went to check the file on my phone. It was there in my recording folder. The file showed a duration of 13 minutes. The file size was normal. Everything looked right. I pressed play. Nothing. The file was corrupted. Completely unplayable. The audio that had seemed so clear through my phone, as speaker just moments ago, was now completely destroyed, reduced to a series of digital artifacts that my phone couldn't interpret. I tried different apps to open it. Nothing worked. The file was, for all practical purposes, invisible. It existed as data but contained no actual sound anymore. I tried again the next night. Same result. Clear recording during the event. Corrupted, unplayable file the moment I tried to access it later. I told Jennifer what was happening. She thought I was being paranoid. She suggested I was hearing things, that my imagination was getting away from me. But the kids heard it too. Emma mentioned it to us at dinner one day. Said she heard a creepy sound outside her window that made her feel scared. Made her feel like something was calling to her. That is when I knew it wasn't in my head. I tried different recording devices. My laptop, this voice recorder, a portable audio recorder I borrowed from a friend, even a professional-grade digital voice recorder. None of it mattered. The recordings always seemed perfect in the moment. The audio playback during the calling always sounded clear and real. But the moment the clock struck midnight and the calling stopped, the files would become corrupted. Unplayable, unusable. It was as if something was actively destroying the evidence the moment the sound ended. I reached out to a colleague at work, a guy named Tom who had a background in audio engineering. I didn't tell him the full story. I just said I was having problems with audio files corrupting and asked if he had any explanation. He suggested that the files might be getting encrypted somehow, or that there was a hardware issue with my recording devices. But when I sent him one of the supposedly corrupted files, he came back with something unsettling. The file wasn't corrupted at all. The file was completely empty. No audio data, no metadata, no information whatsoever. It was as if the device had recorded 13 minutes of absolute nothing. Complete digital silence. A file that existed but contained zero information. Tom asked if I was playing a prank on him. He seemed genuinely disturbed. I wasn't pranking him. By the end of November, I had become obsessed. Every night at 11:47, I would position myself near the edge of the forest with whatever recording device I could find. Every night, the calling would begin. That eerie, terrifying, deliberate pulsing sound that came from somewhere deep in the woods. And every night, when I tried to review the files, they would be gone. Not corrupted anymore, actually gone. The files would disappear from my devices entirely. No trace that I had ever recorded anything. My wife asked me to stop. She said the obsession was unhealthy. She said I was letting a strange noise turn me into someone she didn't recognize. But I couldn't stop, because the calling was getting louder. What had started as a sound barely audible from inside the house was now loud enough to hear clearly from my bedroom. It was getting stronger, getting closer, getting more insistent. The kids were having nightmares. Emma woke up screaming one night, claiming something was knocking on her window. Marcus said he kept hearing his name being called from the woods. My wife wanted to move. She said the house wasn't worth whatever this was, but I convinced her to stay. I convinced her that we just needed to understand what was happening. That once we understood it, it would lose its power over us. I was wrong about that. In early December, I did something I shouldn't have done. I decided to go into the woods at night. I told myself I would find the source of the calling. I would face whatever was out there and prove to myself that it was just something rational, something explainable, something that wouldn't seem half as scary once I had a visual to go with the sound. At 11:30 p.m., I grabbed a flashlight and headed out toward the tree line. Jennifer begged me not to go. She stood in the kitchen doorway, her face pale, asking me what I thought I was doing. I told her I would be back in an hour. I told her not to worry. I told her everything would be fine. The moment I crossed into the woods, everything changed. The darkness was absolute. My flashlight seemed to barely penetrate it. The trees pressed in close, their branches creating a canopy so thick that even the ambient light from the stars couldn't reach the forest floor. The air felt different too. Colder, heavier, like breathing through wet cloth. I walked slowly, carefully, moving deeper into that terrible darkness. The forest floor was covered with pine needles and dead leaves. My footsteps made almost no sound. But I could hear other sounds. All around me, just at the edge of my perception, were the sounds of movement. Something moving through the trees. Multiple somethings, maybe, circling, keeping pace with me. I told myself it was deer. It was raccoons. It was normal forest wildlife responding to my presence. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. At 11:47, the calling began. But this time it was different. This time I was inside it. The sound came from all around me at once. Not from one direction, from everywhere. The eerie, rhythmic pulsing seemed to come from the ground beneath my feet, from the trees surrounding me, from the darkness above my head. It was a calling that existed in 3 dimensions. A terrifying, deliberate sound that had intention behind it. A sound that wanted me to understand something. And then I realized what the rhythm was. It wasn't random. It was a pattern, a repeating pattern, a code, a message in sound. Something was trying to communicate with me. Something in the darkness of those woods was deliberately making that pattern. And it was aimed directly at me. I ran. I done. I remember the run back to the house. I remember the darkness. I remember branches hitting my face, drawing blood. I remember the feeling of being pursued by something I couldn't see. I remember the terrifying certainty that if I fell, if I stumbled, if I gave that thing even a moment of opportunity, it would catch me. I burst out of the tree line and sprinted to the house, slamming the door behind me. Jennifer was standing in the hallway, face white with fear. She had heard the sounds. Even from inside the house, she had heard that terrible calling. And she had heard my screams as I ran back. I spent the next 3 days in bed. Not sick, just mentally and emotionally broken. I couldn't explain what I had experienced. I couldn't describe what that presence in the woods was. All I knew was that something was out there, something that was intelligent, something that was aware of us, something that wanted something from us. The calling continued every night. At exactly 11:47 p.m., without fail, I no longer tried to record it. I no longer tried to investigate it. I simply sat in my house and listened while that eerie sound pulsed through the darkness, and I wondered what would happen if I didn't resist next time. What would happen if I walked back into those woods and let it have whatever it wanted from me? In the second week of December, I discovered something in my son, this room that changed everything. Marcus had been drawing, pages and pages of drawings, all of them the same image, all of them showing the forest, all of them showing something standing in the trees, something tall, something with too many angles to its body, something that didn't quite look like it belonged to any natural category of animal. And underneath every single drawing, Marcus had written the same phrase repeatedly, over and over, the same words in a child's shaky handwriting. It knows my name. It knows my name. It knows my name. I asked Marcus where these drawings came from. He said the thing in the woods was teaching him. Every night at 11:47, he could see it. It was showing him what it looked like. It was teaching him its language. It wanted him to understand. I took those drawings and burned them. All of them. I told Marcus never to draw anything like that again. I told him it was just his imagination. But I didn't believe it, and I think Marcus knew I didn't believe it. That night, I made a decision. I was going to try one more time to record the sound. But this time, I was going to use a method that couldn't fail. I was going to use my laptop as screen recording software. Not just audio, video. I would record the timestamp on my clock. I would capture visual proof that the event was happening. I would document it in a way that couldn't be erased. At 11:47, I started the recording. I aimed the laptop at the window, capturing the darkness outside and the timestamp in the corner of the screen. The calling began. For 13 minutes, I recorded. When it stopped at exactly midnight, I immediately saved the file. The file saved successfully. I could see it in my documents folder. A video file, 47 megabytes, labeled with today, its date. I opened it, The video played. It showed my window, the darkness outside, the timestamp in the corner. The audio was crystal clear. That eerie, terrible, deliberate calling sound. 13 minutes of pure, undeniable proof. I had done it. I had captured evidence that something impossible was happening. I watched the entire video. Then I closed it and went to open it again, wanting to send it to someone, wanting to share it with the world. The file was gone. Not corrupted. Gone. Deleted from my hard drive. Erased from every location. As if it had never existed. I checked my trash folder. Nothing. I checked my backup drives. Nothing. That 47 megabyte video file had simply vanished, leaving no trace behind. It was at that moment that I understood the terrifying truth. Whatever was in those woods, it didn't want to be recorded. It didn't want to be documented. It didn't want proof of its existence to reach the outside world. And more than that, it had the ability to control digital information. It could reach into my devices, into my files, into my data, and erase any evidence that threatened to expose it. We left the house in the middle of December. I told the landlord we had a family emergency and needed to break the lease. He tried to stop us, tried to force us to stay through the end of our rental agreement, but I paid him what I owed and we packed everything we could into our cars and drove away. I spent Christmas living in a hotel, telling my family that everything was fine, that we would find a new house soon, that the nightmare was over. But I kept checking the security cameras I had installed in the house before we left. I wanted to see if the calling would continue in our absence. I wanted to know if that thing in the woods would finally stop, now that it no longer had us to call to. The calling continues every single night. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the camera picks up the sound clearly. The timestamp on the footage never lies. Something is still out there in those woods, calling into the darkness, waiting for someone to answer. Last week, I received an email from the landlord. Someone new had moved into the property. A family with 2 kids, just like us. They had moved in on a Tuesday. On Thursday night, the landlord received a call from the father. He was frantic. He said there was a sound coming from the woods. A terrifying, rhythmic, deliberate sound. A calling that couldn't be explained. He wanted to break the lease immediately. The landlord refused. He said the property was fine. Said it was probably just the normal sounds of rural life. Said the man should give it more time. I tried to reach out to that landlord. I tried to warn him about what was really happening. I tried to explain that something was wrong with that property. Something fundamentally wrong. Something that existed in those woods and would never leave those woods. And that whatever lived there was interested in families. In children. In people like us who had the misfortune of moving into its territory. He didn't respond to my messages. I've been monitoring the security camera feeds when I can. I watch that house at night. I watch the darkness around it. I wait for 11:47 p.m. to arrive, and I listen to the calling. That eerie, terrifying, deliberate sound that comes from something that shouldn't to exist. And I then notice something else now. Something that terrifies me more than anything else. The calling is changing. It's still rhythmic, still deliberate, still the same pulsing pattern. But there is variation in it now. There is subtlety. There is something like language emerging from the sound. And I think I understand why. That family that moved in, they have 2 kids, 2 children who are hearing the calling every night. 2 children who are being taught the language. 2 children who are learning how to respond. Because they heard something new on the security camera feeds. Just for the past 3 nights. At exactly 12:04 a.m., after the original calling stops, there is a new sound. A sound coming from inside the house. A sound like children trying to mimic the calling. 2 young voices attempting to reproduce that terrible, eerie pattern. They relearning. They were being taught. And I don't think they were going to be able to resist it much longer. The woods behind that house will never be silent again. They recalling out every single night. And eventually, someone will answer. Eventually, someone will understand what the sound is trying to say. Eventually, someone will walk into those trees and meet whatever has been waiting out there in the darkness. And I have a horrifying feeling that when someone finally answers, the calling won't stop. It will only get louder. It will only get closer. And there are so many families living on the edges of those Pennsylvania woods. So many houses with children who are hearing that eerie sound at night. So many people who are about to make the same terrible mistake we made and move into properties where something ancient and patient and deeply, fundamentally wrong has been waiting for a very long time. Story 7. Night shift at the Clearview Motel. The scariest thing I ever saw was an empty room. Let me explain what I mean, because what happened at the Clearview Motel still haunts me every single night, and I need someone to understand why I can never work the graveyard shift again. I was 38 years old, divorced, living in a cramped apartment outside Scranton, Pennsylvania, when I took the job as night manager at the Clearview. It was one of those forgotten roadside motels off Interstate 81, the kind truckers use when they need cheap sleep between long hauls. 2 floors, 40 rooms, a flickering neon sign that buzzed like angry wasps. The pay was terrible, but nights were quiet, and quiet was exactly what I needed after the chaos of my marriage falling apart. The motel had a reputation, nothing specific, just that uneasy feeling people get about certain places. Guests rarely stayed more than one night. The online reviews mentioned strange noises, doors that wouldn't stay closed, the unsettling sensation of being watched through the curtains. I figured it was just the usual paranoia that comes with staying in a rundown motel in the middle of nowhere. I should have paid more attention to those reviews. My shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 in the morning. Most nights, I sat behind the front desk reading paperbacks and watching security monitors that showed empty hallways and a parking lot with maybe 5 or 6 cars. The building itself was old, built in the 1960s, with that depressing architecture that looks like a prison designed by someone who hated humanity. Cinder block walls painted that industrial beige color that absorbs hope. Room 207 was at the far end of the 2nd floor, tucked into the corner where the hallway dead ended. It had been occupied for 3 nights by a middle-aged couple from Ohio, traveling through to visit family in New York. Normal people, quiet, they barely left their room except to grab coffee from the lobby in the morning. On their 3rd night, around 2:30 a.m., I got a call from room 205. The guest, a tired-looking salesman who checked in around midnight, was complaining about noise from next door. "Banging sounds," he said, "like furniture being dragged across the floor, water running, voices, maybe, though he couldn't make out words." It had been going on for 20 minutes. I checked the guest log. The Ohio couple in 207 had their car in the lot, so they should have been in their room. I called them first, standard procedure, but nobody answered. The phone just rang and rang in that hollow way that tells you a room is empty even though it shouldn't to be. I grabbed the master key and headed upstairs. The Clearview had that specific smell all old motels have, a mixture of cleaning chemicals, cigarette smoke that had soaked into the walls decades ago, and something damp that never quite goes away. The 2nd floor hallway was long and narrow, with ice machines humming at one end and an exit sign casting everything in sick green light. As I walked toward 207, I could hear what the salesman was talking about. Water running, definitely. A shower, maybe. And something else, a rhythmic thumping that echoed through the thin walls. But no voices, just that disturbing percussion of something moving in a space that should have been still. I knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps, calling out that it was management, that we received a noise complaint. No answer. The shower kept running. The thumping continued, slow and deliberate, like someone methodically striking the wall. I knocked again, louder. Announced myself. Nothing. That's when I noticed something chilling about the door. The security latch was engaged. I could see it through the gap, that little brass chain pulled tight. The door was locked from the inside, meaning someone had to be in there. But nobody was answering. The running water created this horrible ambiance, this knowledge that something was happening behind that door, something that didn't want to be interrupted. I stood there for a full minute, listening to that shower run and run, water hitting tile with that hollow echo that makes you think of drowning. I went back downstairs and checked the security cameras. The Clearview had 3 cameras covering the parking lot and 1 on each floor hallway. I rewound the footage from the 2nd floor, looking for when the couple had left their room. They hadn't. The camera showed their door closed all night. Nobody had entered or exited room 207 since they returned from dinner at 6 p.m. But the door was locked from inside. Someone had to be in there. I called the police, explained the situation. Unresponsive guests, locked door, continuous noise. The dispatcher said an officer would come by, but it might be 30 minutes. It was a quiet night in a quiet county, and this didn't sound like an emergency. I was advised to wait unless I suspected immediate danger. So I waited and listened. The shower kept running upstairs, water pouring and pouring like someone had turned it on and forgotten about it. The thumping had stopped, but somehow the silence that replaced it felt worse. More expectant. 20 minutes passed. I kept watching the monitors, kept seeing that closed door, that empty hallway. Then something happened that made my skin crawl. On the camera feed, the door to 207 opened. Just swung open, slow and smooth, revealing nothing but darkness inside. But I was watching the hallway from downstairs. Nobody had opened that door. It just opened on its own. I grabbed the phone to call the police again when room 205 rang the front desk. The salesman, angry now, asking why I hadn't done anything about the noise because it had started again, worse than before. Scraping sounds, he said, like something being dragged. I told him police were on the way, that he should stay in his room. Then I did something stupid, something I regret every single day. I went back upstairs. The door to 207 stood wide open. The hallway was freezing, cold air pouring out of that room like a refrigerator had been opened. I could see inside from the hallway. The lights were off, but the bathroom light was on, casting long shadows across cheap carpet. The shower was still running. I could hear it clearly now, water hitting tile with that relentless rhythm that sounds almost like breathing. I stepped into the doorway and flipped the light switch. The room flooded with harsh fluorescent light, revealing absolutely nothing unusual. 2 double beds, neatly made, suitcases still packed and sitting on the luggage rack, TV off, curtains drawn, everything perfectly normal except for one horrifying detail. The room was empty, completely empty. The Ohio couple was gone, but their car was still in the parking lot. Their suitcases were still here, and that shower was still running in the bathroom. I stood in that doorway, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't move. The bathroom door was partially open, steam rolling out in thick clouds. I could see the edge of the shower curtain, light blue plastic dotted with water droplets. I called out, asking if anyone was in there. My voice sounded thin and scared in that small room. No answer, just water, endless water, running and running. I crossed the room toward the bathroom. Each step felt like walking through mud, my body fighting against what my mind was forcing it to do. The carpet was wet near the bathroom door, soaked through like water had been running onto it for hours. I pushed the door open. The bathroom was small, typical motel layout. Sink, toilet, combination tub, and shower. The shower curtain was pulled closed. Steam had fogged the mirror completely, turning it into a blank white surface. But someone had written in that fog, one word, written in shaking letters like whoever did it was terrified. Leave. The shower curtain moved, not from wind, not from water pressure. It moved like someone had brushed against it from inside. I reached out, my hand trembling, and grabbed the plastic. In one motion, I yanked it open. The shower was empty. Water poured from the shower head, scalding hot, filling the small room with steam. But there was nobody there. Nobody at all, except the drain was clogged. Hair, thick and dark, wound around the drain cover in impossible amounts. And the water level was rising, filling the tub inch by inch because it couldn't drain fast enough. I turned off the shower. The sudden silence was deafening. In that quiet, I heard something that stopped my heart. From somewhere in the room, from everywhere and nowhere, came the sound of breathing. Wet, labored breathing like someone drowning. I backed out of the bathroom. The mirror had fogged up again despite the shower being off. And in that new fog, something was writing. I watched, paralyzed, as letters formed one by one. They never left. The breathing got louder. I could feel it now, cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around. The room was still empty, but both beds, which had been made perfectly when I entered, now had deep impressions in them. Like 2 people were lying there, like invisible weight pressed down on the mattresses. I ran. I don't remember making the decision. 1 second I was standing there. The next I was sprinting down the hallway, taking stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the lobby just as the police officer was walking through the door. I tried to explain, tripping over my words. Empty room, locked from inside, running shower, people vanished. He looked at me like I was drunk or crazy, but he agreed to check it out. We went upstairs together. Room 207, its door was closed again. I knew I'd left it open. The officer knocked, announced himself. No response. He used my master key to open the door. The room was normal. Beds made, bathroom dry. No steam, no water, no message in the mirror. The officer checked the bathroom, the closet, under the beds. Nothing unusual. He asked if I'd been drinking, but I saw something he didn't. In the bathroom, wound around the shower drain, was that hair. Thick, dark, impossibly long. The officer didn't notice it, or pretended not to. He suggested I'd been working too many nights, that the mind plays tricks in the small hours. He left, giving me a concerned look that said he thought I was losing it. I checked the parking lot. The Ohio couple's car was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there. I reviewed security footage from the parking lot camera. Their car was there at 2 a.m. At 2:45, the timestamp when I was upstairs in their room, the car simply vanished between frames. 1 second there, next second gone. I called the number they used to book the room. Disconnected. I searched for their names in our system. The reservation had been paid in cash. The name on the registration was fake. I realized. John and Jane Smith. How had I not noticed? The salesman in 205 checked out at dawn, refusing to stay another minute. He said he heard screaming around 3 a.m. A woman screamed, coming from next door, even though I'd been in that room and it was empty. He said he'd never stay at the Clearview again. I quit the next day, told the owner I had a family emergency, that I couldn't work nights anymore. He seemed surprised. He mentioned that they go through night managers pretty regularly, that the position has high turnover. Before I left, I asked him about room 207. He got quiet, that kind of quiet that tells you someone knows something they don't want to say. Finally, he told me. 20 years ago, a couple had drowned in that bathroom. Murder-suicide. The husband killed his wife in the shower, then filled the tub and drowned himself. They locked the door from inside. Police had to break it down. Found them both in water that had overflowed, soaking the entire room. The motel had renovated. New carpet, new bathroom fixtures, new everything. But the room kept having problems. Guests complaining about water, about noises, about feeling like they weren't alone. The owner had stopped renting it for a while, but business was bad, and he needed every room. He asked me not to spread it around. Said it was just coincidence, that old buildings have quirks. But his eyes told a different story. He knew. He'd always known. I drive past the Clearview sometimes, on my way to my new job in Harrisburg. The neon sign still flickers. Cars still park in that lot. And I wonder about the people staying in room 207. If they hear the shower running in the night, if they see messages forming in steam, if they feel that terrible presence of something that drowned and never left. Last week, I saw on the news that a couple went missing from a motel in Scranton. Their car was found in the parking lot, but they vanished without a trace. The motel manager said their room was locked from the inside when they went to check. The shower was still running. It was the Clearview. It was room 207. And now I can't stop thinking about what the mirror said. They never left, because maybe that couple from Ohio never made it out of that room. Maybe they're still there, trapped in whatever horrible loop plays out in that space. Maybe everyone who stays in 207 joins them. The motel is still open, still renting rooms, still putting people in 207. And I can't do anything but live with the knowledge that I was in that room, that I felt that presence, that I barely got out before whatever happened to those others happened to me. Sometimes at night, I wake up and hear water running. My apartment is silent, but I swear I hear it. That endless shower, running and running somewhere far away. And I wonder if leaving that room was enough, or if some part of what haunts the Clearview followed me home. Story 8. Message I never sent. The last thing I remember clearly is the headlights catching something in the road. Something that shouldn't have been there. Something that stood perfectly still while I slammed on the brakes, tires screaming across wet asphalt on that empty Pennsylvania back road. But here is what terrifies me most. I do remember sending that final text message. The one the police showed my wife. The one that came from my phone at exactly 11:47 p.m. The one I apparently deleted myself. I need to tell you what really happened that night, because the official story is a lot. It was late October, and I was driving home from a sales conference in Scranton. The highway would have gotten me back by 10, but there'd been an accident. Traffic backed up for miles, red brake lights stretching into the darkness like a river of blood. I knew the back roads, grew up in Pennsylvania, knew every shortcut through the hills and forests that most people never see. So I took exit 47 and disappeared into the rural darkness, thinking I'd save myself an hour of sitting in traffic. Thinking I was making a smart choice. The road was narrow, winding through dense forest that pressed in from both sides. My headlights carved a tunnel through the black, illuminating nothing but trees and the broken yellow line dividing the asphalt. No other cars, no houses, no streetlights, just me and the forest and the creeping sense that I made a terrible mistake. My phone sat in the cup holder, GPS guiding me through turns I barely remembered from childhood. The automated voice was my only companion, cold and emotionless, telling me to continue for 3.7 miles. The radio had lost its signal 10 minutes back, leaving only static that I eventually turned off. The silence was worse than the static. That's when I saw the figure. At first, I thought it was a deer, just a shadow at the edge of my headlights, standing in the middle of my lane. But as I got closer, my brain processed what my eyes were seeing, and fear hit me like ice water in my veins. It was a person, a man, standing completely motionless in the center of the road, facing my approaching car. He wore dark clothes that seemed to absorb the light, and his face was too pale, almost luminous in the darkness. I slammed the brakes. My car shuddered to a stop maybe 20 feet from him. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't react at all to the screaming tires or the bright headlights now flooding over him. He just stood there, arms at his sides, staring directly at me through my windshield. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to reverse, to turn around, to get away from this creepy, unsettling scene. But I am a rational person. I told myself he might need help. Maybe his car had broken down. Maybe he was lost. Maybe he was injured. I reached for my phone to call for help. And that's when things got truly horrifying. My phone was already open to my messages. The screen glowed in the dark car, and I watched, frozen in shock, as words appeared in a text to my wife. Words I wasn't typing. Words that formed letter by letter as if invisible fingers were touching the screen. Someone standing in road ahead. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. It clattered into the passenger footwell, screen still glowing, and I looked back up at the figure in the road. He moved closer. Not walked, not taken steps. He was just closer, maybe 10 feet from my bumper now, still staring with that too pale face that I could now see had no features. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, just smooth, blank skin the color of wet paper. Terror is a funny thing. It doesn't feel like the movies. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like your whole body is shutting down, like your mind is trying to reject what you re-seeing because accepting it would mean accepting that reality isn't what you thought it was. I sat there, unable to move, unable to think, just staring at this thing that looked like a man but wasn't. Then it tilted its head, a slow, mechanical movement, like it was studying me. Like it was curious. I slammed the car into reverse and hit the gas. The engine roared, and I shot backward down the dark road. My neck craned around to see where I was going, tree branches whipping past on both sides. I didn't stop until I put maybe 100 yards between us. Then I spun the wheel and twisted the car around, pointing back the way I'd come. My headlights swept across the road where the figure had been. Empty. Nothing there, just wet asphalt and the forest pressing in from all sides. I sat there, engine idling, hands shaking on the wheel, breathing in short, panicked gasps. Had I imagined it? Was I having some kind of mental breakdown? Then I saw it again, in my rearview mirror, standing in the road behind me, the same impossible distance away it had been before, like it had simply appeared there. Still motionless, still watching. I drove fast, taking turns without thinking, just trying to get away, to find another car, another person. Proof that I wasn't alone out here with that thing. The GPS had stopped working. The screen showed only static, then went black. My phone was still on the floor where I dropped it, and I didn't dare reach for it. The road seemed to go on forever, winding through the forest in ways I didn't remember. I should have hit the highway by now. Should have seen lights, houses, something. But there was only darkness and trees and that creeping sensation that I wasn't just lost. I was somewhere I shouldn't be. Somewhere wrong. That's when my car died. Just stopped. The engine cut out. The headlights dimmed to nothing. And I was rolling forward in complete silence, coasting to a stop in the middle of this nightmare road. I turned the key. Nothing. Tried again. Nothing. The car was completely dead, and I was sitting in absolute darkness so thick I couldn't see my own hands on the steering wheel. The fear that had been ice in my veins turned into liquid fire. I fumbled for my phone, my hands slapping against the floor mat, searching desperately. My fingers closed around it, and I pulled it up, pressed the home button. The screen flared to life, blindingly bright after the darkness, and I saw that I had no signal. 0 bars. And a notification. Message sent to Sarah. I opened my messages with trembling hands. The text "ID watch" type itself was gone. Deleted. But there was a new one, sent just seconds ago while my phone was on the floor. While I wasn't touching it. It's closer now. I screamed. Actually screamed, the sound raw and animal in the confined space of the car. I grabbed the door handle, thinking I'd run. I'd take my chances in the forest. Anything was better than sitting here waiting. But the doors wouldn't open. The locks were engaged, and the electronic system was dead. I was trapped. A tap on my window. Soft, gentle, almost polite. I turned, holding my phone up like a flashlight. And there it was. The faceless thing, standing right outside my driver's side window, its blank head tilted, one hand raised, finger extended, tapping against the glass. Tap, 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 methodical and patient. My phone buzzed. Another message, sent from my number to my wife. He wants to show me something. I was sobbing now, pressing myself against the passenger side, as far from that window as I could get. The tapping continued, never faster, never slower, just that steady rhythm. Tap, 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 and then it stopped. The thing pressed its hand flat against the window. Its fingers were too long, I realized. Too many joints. The palm spread across the glass, and where it touched, frost began to form. Intricate patterns spreading outward, beautiful and terrifying, crawling across the window like living things. My phone buzzed again. I looked down at the screen, and what I saw made something inside my mind crack. The message was from my number, but it wasn't sent to my wife. It was sent to me. From me, to me. You should have taken the highway. The frost spreading across my window formed shapes, symbols, writing in a language I'd never seen but somehow understood. They burned themselves into my consciousness, and I knew what they said. I knew what they meant. They were instructions. They were coordinates. They were an invitation to a place that shouldn't exist, a place that this thing called home. The car door opened, by itself, just swung wide into the darkness, and cold air rushed in, carrying that smell of rot and earth and something ancient. The faceless thing was gone. The road was empty, but I could feel something behind me. In the backseat, breathing, waiting. I ran. I left everything. My car, my phone, my wallet. I ran into the forest, branches tearing at my face and clothes, roots trying to trip me. The darkness so complete I might as well have been blind. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, and I collapsed against a tree, gasping, listening. The forest was silent. No wind, no animals, no sounds of pursuit, just my own ragged breathing and the hammering of my heart. Then I heard my phone. My ringtone, clear as day, coming from somewhere in front of me, playing that cheerful melody I'd chosen because my wife liked it. I crawled toward the sound, my hand sinking into cold mud, and found it lying on the ground, screen glowing. One new message, from me, sent 1 minute ago. I'm still in the car. I don't remember what happened next. The police found me on Route 6 at dawn, walking barefoot and covered in mud, my eyes wide and unblinking. They said I kept repeating the same thing over and over. They said I wouldn't stop. My wife told me later, when I was in the hospital, sedated and strapped down because I tried to hurt myself. She told me what I kept saying. He is still sending messages. He is still using my phone. They found my car 3 days later, exactly where I left it on that back road. Engine cold, doors locked, phone sitting in the cup holder, battery dead. They recovered the data from it, showed me the messages I sent. The text about someone in the road, the others, all sent at times the phone company confirmed. But here is the thing they couldn't explain. The thing that keeps me in this hospital room, the thing that makes the doctors look at me with confusion and fear. Every message I supposedly sent that night was deleted, remotely, from my phone, while it sat in police evidence, while it was powered off. And 3 nights ago, my wife's phone got a text. From my number, from the phone sitting in a sealed evidence bag in a locked room. The message was simple. I found what he showed me. I am still there. And I am still sending messages. They won. Let me see my wife anymore. They won. tell me why. But I heard the nurses talking. They think I don't understand that the medication keeps me too foggy to process what they re-saying. But I heard them. I heard them say that my wife showed them something. More messages. Messages that come every night at 11:47. Messages describing things, terrible things, things that are happening to the version of me that is still sitting in that car on that dark road. Messages describing what it is like to be slowly pulled into that place the symbols promised. That place behind reality. That place where the faceless things wait. The doctors say I am having delusions, trauma-induced psychosis. But I know the truth. Part of me never left that road. Part of me is still there, still sitting in the darkness, still waiting for whatever comes next. And it's trying to tell me something. It's trying to warn me. Because tonight, at 11:47, I'm going to get a message from myself. And this time, I think I'm going to answer. Story 9. House that knew my name. I heard my name whispered through the walls at 3 a.m. And that is when I knew something in that Pennsylvania house was terribly, horrifyingly wrong. Let me back up. Let me explain how I ended up in that creepy, unsettling situation. Because this is the scariest story they ever lived through, and I need you to understand exactly what happened to me. I need you to know what that house was capable of doing. I bought the house in late September. A foreclosure in central Pennsylvania, about 40 minutes from Harrisburg. Beautiful old Victorian, built in 1887. 4 bedrooms, original hardwood floors. A wraparound porch with a view of thick Pennsylvania forest stretching for miles. The price was impossibly low. The real estate agent seemed nervous showing it to me, but she attributed it to the market conditions. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The inspection turned up nothing serious. Some old electrical work that needed updating. A roof that would need replacement in 5 years. The inspector said the bones were solid. Said it was a good investment. I signed the papers 2 weeks later. The first night in that house, I felt it. That eerie sensation you get when something is watching you. That creepy awareness that you're not alone. I chalked it up to nerves. New place, unfamiliar sounds. The house settling. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was a rational man, 42 years old, an engineer. I didn't believe in ghosts or haunted houses or supernatural nonsense. But that house knew better. The whispers started during the second week. Soft sounds in the darkness. At first, I thought it was wind through the old walls. Then I thought maybe it was pipes. Old houses make noise. Old houses creak and groan and settle. But these sounds were different. They had rhythm. They had intention. They sounded almost like voices. Barely audible. Just beyond the edge of understanding. I tried to ignore them. I focused on renovations. I hired contractors to update the wiring. I brought in people to assess the plumbing. While they worked, I didn't hear the whispers. The sounds disappeared during daylight. But the moment night fell and everyone left, they came back. Soft, persistent, unsettling. Then came the night I actually heard my name. I was lying in bed around 2:45 in the morning. I hadn't been sleeping well since I moved in. Something about that house made sleep difficult. Made me feel unsafe in a way I couldn't explain. I was drifting in and out of consciousness when I heard it. Crystal clear, unmistakable. Michael. My name, whispered from somewhere in the darkness of my bedroom. Not loudly, not aggressively, just a soft, clear voice calling my name as if someone was standing in the corner, calling to me, trying to get my attention. I sat up. My heart jumped. I flipped on the bedside lamp. The room was empty. Just my furniture, the walls, the door I locked from the inside. Nothing. Nobody. Just me and the terrifying certainty that I had heard my name spoken by a voice that shouldn't have existed. I got out of bed. I checked every room in the house. Checked the locks. Looked in closets. Behind doors. Under the beds. Nothing. The house was empty except for me. And yet I had heard my name. Clear. Distinct. Undeniably real. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light on, telling myself I was being irrational. Maybe I'd been dreaming. Maybe my subconscious had created the sound. Maybe stress and lack of sleep were playing tricks on me. These are the stories we tell ourselves when we encounter something that shouldn't exist. But I knew what I heard. Over the next few nights, it happened again. Always around 3 in the morning. Always my name. Always from a different part of the house. From the hallway. From the kitchen. From inside the walls themselves. And each time, I'd get up and search. Each time, I'd find nothing. I started recording, set up my phone with an audio app, placed it on my nightstand, and recorded everything that happened during the night. I told myself that if I could capture the sound, if I could have proof, then I could figure out what was happening. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe it was an animal in the walls. Maybe it was some strange acoustic phenomenon created by the old house's design. The next morning, I listened to the recording. For the first 2 hours, nothing. Just the normal sounds of a house settling, the hum of the heating system, my breathing as I tried to sleep. Then, at 2:47 in the morning, it appeared on the recording. My name, spoken in a voice that was definitely not mine. Definitely not an animal. Definitely not an explainable sound. The voice sounded sad, lonely, like someone calling out into an empty darkness, hoping desperately for an answer that would never come. I listened to that recording 17 times that day. Each time, I was more certain of what I was hearing. And each time, the creepy, unsettling fear in my chest grew stronger. This was not something I was imagining. This was not in my head. Something in that house knew my name, and something in that house was trying to reach me. That's when I decided to research the house. I went to the county records office. I looked up the property history. The house had been built in 1887 by a family named Hendricks. They lived there for 12 years before selling. Then it passed through 17 different families over the next 90 years. Some stayed for decades. Others left within weeks. The pattern became clear when I really started digging. Every family that had lived there longer than 5 years had moved suddenly, abruptly, without explanation in the public records. And the families that had stayed only a few weeks seemed to have been terrified into leaving. I found old newspaper clippings. A 1952 article about a family named Preston who abandoned their house after only 3 weeks, leaving furniture and belongings behind. The article quoted the father as saying he couldn't explain what was happening, but his family, his safety was at risk. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A handwritten journal in the County Historical Society, donated anonymously in 1998. The journal belonged to a woman named Eleanor Marsh. She had lived in my house from 1946 to 1951. Her journal entries described the terrifying, unsettling experience of living in that place. She wrote about hearing voices calling her name, about waking up at 3 in the morning to the sound of someone whispering her daughter's name, about researching the house, its history, and discovering something that had shattered her sense of reality. The house, Eleanor wrote, had been built on the site of a mass grave. In 1883, before the house was constructed, the land had been used as a burial ground for a state psychiatric hospital that had closed decades earlier. The hospital had burned down in 1879, killing many patients. The bodies that hadn't been claimed were buried in unmarked graves on the surrounding land. When the hospital closed and the land was sold, the graves were forgotten. The new owner built a house on top of them. Eleanor had discovered this through old hospital records and cemetery documents. She found lists of names of patients who had died in that hospital, names of people buried in unmarked graves. And as she was reading through those names, she realized something horrifying. The voices were calling out the names of people who had lived in the house, current residents, and before that, the voices had been calling out the names of hospital patients. Names that matched the burial records, names of people who had died on that land, names that had been forgotten for over a century. The house was remembering them, and it was trying to remember the people living inside it. Eleanor's final journal entry was dated November 1951. She wrote that her family was leaving, that she had contacted a priest and had the house blessed, but the blessing had made things worse, not better. The voices had become frantic, desperate. They seemed to be pulling at the fabric of reality, trying harder to reach out, to be acknowledged, to be remembered. She wrote that she believed the dead beneath the house were not evil or malevolent. They were lonely. They had been forgotten. They had no one left to remember them. And when living people moved into the house above them, they reached out. They tried to connect. They called out the names of the living, hoping that being remembered by someone, anyone, might ease their eternal solitude. But the living always left, because hearing your name called by the dead, repeatedly, night after night, breaks something in your mind. It shatters your sense of safety. It makes you question the boundary between the living world and whatever lies beyond. I sat in that historical society for 3 hours, shaking, reading Eleanor's words over and over. And I understood what I had to do. I had to get out. I had to leave that house and never return, because I couldn't bear to be the thing that comforted the dead. I couldn't. To live with the knowledge that beneath my feet, beneath the floorboards and the foundation, there were bodies. Forgotten bodies. Lonely bodies that had been waiting in darkness for over 100 years. I went home that evening and packed. Threw clothes into a suitcase. Grabbed my important documents. I didn't care about the furniture or the renovations or the money I invested. I just wanted to leave. I wanted to get away from that eerie, unsettling place. But as I was carrying my suitcase toward the door, something stopped me. The whispers. They were coming from everywhere now. Not just my name, not just calling out to me, but a chorus of voices. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all whispering at once. An overlapping cacophony of desperate, lonely sounds. All the voices of the dead beneath the house. Finally realizing that someone was actually listening. That someone had acknowledged them. That someone knew they existed. I stood in the middle of that house, frozen, listening to the horrifying symphony of the forgotten. And I made a decision that changed everything. I didn't leave. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table and I wrote names. Every name from Eleanor as hospital records. Every name from the burial documentation. I wrote them all down. I wrote them slowly and carefully, and I spoke them aloud as I wrote them. I said their names. I acknowledged them. I remembered them. It took me 6 hours. My hand cramped. My voice grew hoarse. But I read every single name aloud in that house. And as I did, something happened. The whispers stopped. The eerie sensation of being watched faded. The creepy, unsettling weight that had hung over the house lifted. And in the silence that followed, I felt something different. I felt gratitude. I felt peace. Not mine, theirs. I finished writing the names at 4 a.m. I fell asleep at the table. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the windows. The house was quiet. Completely, peacefully quiet. For the first time since I moved in, the house felt calm. Safe. Like a place where people could actually live. I've lived in that Pennsylvania house for almost 2 years now. The whispers never came back. The voices never called my name again. But something changed in me that night. I understand now that the house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by forgotten people, by the lonely and the lost, by human beings whose names had been erased from history. And they weren't trying to hurt me. They were just trying to be remembered. I donated Eleanor's journal to the Historical Society along with my own research. I worked with the county to place a proper memorial on the property. A stone marker with all the names of the buried patients. A quiet, respectful acknowledgement that these people had lived, that they had mattered, that they deserved to be remembered. And I still live here, in the house that knew my name. Because now I understand that a house doesn't become haunted because of evil. A house becomes haunted because of love. Because people, even after death, long to be acknowledged, long to be remembered, long to know that their existence mattered to someone. The scary part, to living with the dead. The scary part is realizing how easy it is for people to be completely forgotten. How quickly we erase the lives of those who can, to speak for themselves. How a person can live and die and be buried and no one ever speaks their name again. Every night, I think about those voices calling out in the darkness. And I'm grateful I stayed long enough to listen. I'm grateful I stayed long enough to remember them. Because the most terrifying horror what happens after we die. It's what happens if nobody remembers us at all. That's the real nightmare. The eerie, unsettling truth that lurks beneath that old Pennsylvania house. And now that I've acknowledged it, now that I've given those forgotten people back their names, I sleep peacefully in the darkness. The dead beneath this house are finally at peace. And so am I. Story 10. What the police never explained. I made a phone call that should not have been possible. I described events that had not yet happened. And then I watched every single one of those events unfold exactly as I had spoken them into the darkness. This is the call that the Pennsylvania State Police sealed away. This is the testimony they refused to acknowledge. This is what I have been living with for 3 years, and I cannot stay silent anymore. My name is Michael. I am 46 years old, and I work as a contractor fixing houses across western Pennsylvania. I am not a dramatic person. I do not exaggerate. I do not believe in the supernatural or unexplained phenomena. I am the kind of guy who fixes problems with his hands and his tools. But what happened to me in that old farmhouse near Bentleyville cannot be explained by anything rational or reasonable. It started on an ordinary Tuesday in March. I was working on renovations at a property that had been abandoned for nearly 15 years. The house sat on about 40 acres of land, surrounded by dense forest and old fence lines that were falling apart. The owners had finally decided to restore it and try to sell it. They hired me to assess the damage and begin the work. When I first arrived at the house that morning, something felt wrong. The air was too thick, almost suffocating. The trees seemed to lean toward the property rather than away from it. I told myself I was being paranoid, just reacting to the creepy atmosphere of an old abandoned house. Every contractor has worked in houses like this, but as I spent more time there, the feeling only grew stronger. The house itself was decaying in ways that seemed unnatural. Wallpaper did not just peel. It hung in long, deliberate strips, like something had pulled it down piece by piece. Windows were not simply broken. They were shattered from the inside, the glass pointing outward as if whatever had broken them was trying to escape. The floorboards in certain rooms were warped in patterns that made no sense, twisted into shapes that looked almost purposeful. I spent the first day documenting everything with photographs and measurements. By late afternoon, I was the only person there. The owners had given me a key and told me I could work on my own schedule. That afternoon, the unseemly, eerie feeling in the house intensified. The shadows seemed darker than they should have been. The silence was so complete that it felt like a physical presence, pressing down on me from all sides. Around 5 o'clock, I decided to take a break. I walked outside onto the crumbling porch and looked out at the forest. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, and the light was taking on that golden, unsettling quality that comes just before dusk. In that light, I noticed something I had missed during the morning. There was a small structure about 100 yards into the woods, barely visible through the trees. It looked like a shed or maybe a bunker. Its walls were concrete, stained and cracked with age. There was no door, just an open entrance that led down into darkness. I had no intention of going out there, but I marked it on my site map. I would ask the owners about it later. Back inside the house, I gathered my tools and prepared to leave for the day. As I was packing up, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something made me answer. The moment I did, I heard my own voice on the other end of the line. Not my voice exactly, but close enough that my stomach dropped and my breath caught in my throat. The voice was speaking in a tone I had never used before, calm and measured and deeply unsettling. It was describing events with the clarity of someone reporting what they had already witnessed. There was an accident on the drive home, the voice said. A car would run a red light at the intersection of State Road and Bentley Road. I would swerve to avoid it. My truck would clip the guardrail on the bridge. I would not be seriously injured. The other driver would not stop. The line went dead. I stood in the middle of that creepy, abandoned house with my phone in my trembling hand, trying to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing. A wrong number, a coincidence, some kind of technical glitch. But the fear in my chest told me something different. The fear knew what was coming. I got in my truck and drove carefully toward the main road. Every muscle in my body was tense. I was hypervigilant, watching every intersection, every approaching vehicle. When I reached State Road and Bentley Road, I slowed down even though I had a green light. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. A car came around the corner from my right, traveling at least 50 miles per hour. The driver was not slowing down. The horrifying moment stretched like taffy. The car had a red light. The driver was not going to stop. I swerved hard to the left. My truck, its rear end clipped the guardrail on the bridge with a metallic shriek of impact. The sound of crunching metal filled my ears. The impact threw me sideways, and my shoulder crashed against the driver's side window. Pain exploded through my arm, but I managed to regain control of the truck and pull over. The other car did not stop. It disappeared down the road as if nothing had happened. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip my phone. I called 911 and reported the accident. I gave them my location and told them what had happened. The operator asked me questions about the other vehicle, and I realized I had been too focused on getting control of my truck to see anything useful. I did not have a license plate number. I could not even describe the car with certainty. While I was still on the phone with the dispatcher, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was the same unknown number. The operator asked me to stay on the line, but I found myself pressing the button to take the other call. Again, my own voice filled my ear. It was still calm, still measured, still deeply wrong. The police would arrive in 7 minutes, the voice said. They would ask you about the accident. You would try to explain the phone call. They would not believe you. Officer Harrison would think you were in shock and confused. Officer Reeves would think you were hallucinating. They would write it up as a single vehicle accident with no other parties involved. The other driver would never be found. You would never report this phone call to them. Why would I never report it? I tried to ask, but the voice continued. Because you would know by then. You would understand. The call was not a warning. It was proof. The line went dead again. I sat in my damaged truck in the gathering darkness and waited for the police. My shoulder throbbed with pain. The taste of fear was copper and bitter in my mouth. I did not want to believe what was happening. I did not want to accept that somehow, impossibly, I had called myself from the future. Or the present, or whatever the hell that terrifying timeline was where I had information I should not have possessed. The police arrived exactly 7 minutes after the voice told me they would. Officer Harrison was a younger man, maybe in his 30s, with the kind of careful demeanor that suggested he had seen a lot of accidents. Officer Reeves was older, graying at the temples, with a skeptical expression that never changed throughout our conversation. They examined my truck. They looked at the guardrail. They asked me questions about what had happened. I tried to tell them about the phone call. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my call history. The unknown number was not there. There was no record of the calls at all. Not the first call, not the second call, nothing. It was as if those conversations had never happened in any measurable reality. Officer Harrison suggested that I might be in shock and confused about the sequence of events. Officer Reeves suggested that maybe I had been driving too fast and lost control. They were both polite, but they did not believe me. They filed it as a single vehicle accident, the driver at fault for unsafe operation. There was no hit and run to investigate. There was no other vehicle. There was only me and my damaged truck and a story that no one could verify. I drove home that night in a daze, my shoulders screaming with pain, my mind fracturing under the weight of what I had experienced. I did not sleep. I sat in my living room all night, staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring. When dawn finally came, I had convinced myself that the whole thing was some kind of stress-induced hallucination brought on by working in that creepy old house. But the next morning, my phone rang again. This time, the voice described a gas leak in my kitchen. It said that I would smell it around 11 o'clock. I would call the gas company. They would arrive at noon. The inspector would find a loose connection under the sink that had been slowly leaking for days. If the leak had continued for another week, I would have filled my house with enough gas to cause an explosion if I had lit a single match or used the stove. I did not go to work that day. I stayed home and waited. At precisely 11 o'clock, I smelled the distinctive rotten egg odor of natural gas in my kitchen. Every hair on my body stood on end. I called the gas company with shaking hands. They sent an inspector who arrived exactly at noon. The loose connection was exactly where the voice said it would be. Over the next 3 weeks, the calls continued. The voice always spoke in that calm, measured tone. The voice always described events with perfect accuracy, and every single prediction came true. A pipe burst in my bathroom wall on a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. A bird would fly through my bathroom window on a Thursday morning. My boss would call me on Friday to tell me about a job that had been canceled. A woman I had gone to school with would see me at the grocery store and tell me she was moving back to town. Everything unfolded exactly as the voice from my phone described it. I became obsessed with the calls. I started making lists of what the voice predicted. I started researching the voice itself, trying to analyze its tone and cadence to figure out if it was artificial or real. I recorded the calls when I could, but when I played them back, all I heard was dead air and static. The voice was not registering on any recording device. It existed only in my ears, only in my perception. The most terrifying part was that the voice was not malevolent. It was not threatening or hostile. It was almost kind in its way, warning me about dangers before they happened, giving me information that could keep me safe. But that made it worse somehow. The voice was not trying to hurt me. It was trying to help me, and that meant something far more sinister was controlling this impossible timeline. One night, nearly 3 weeks into the calls, I confronted the voice directly. I demanded to know who it was and what it wanted. The voice became silent for a long moment. Then it spoke, and this time it was not describing future events. It was answering my question. I am you, the voice said. But I am calling from a different version of this moment. A moment where things have gone wrong. A moment where the decisions you make in the next few days lead to outcomes you cannot imagine. I have been calling you to try to prevent that timeline. I have been trying to save you by describing the small events that lead to the larger catastrophe. The line went dead, but not before I heard something in the background of that call. A sound like screaming, or wind, or both at once. I never called the police about the voice. I did not report it to anyone. I knew they would not believe me. The Pennsylvania State Police had already decided that I was unreliable based on the accident report. They would think I was losing my mind. And maybe I was, maybe I still am, What terrifies me most is that the calls have stopped. It has been 3 years, and the voice has not spoken to me since that night when it explained what it was. I tell myself that whatever was trying to prevent the catastrophe has succeeded. I tell myself that I am safe because I avoided whatever timeline the voice was trying to warn me about. But I know the truth in my deepest, darkest thoughts. The voice stopped calling because it realized something horrifying. It realized that no matter what events it predicted, no matter what warnings it gave, the outcome was always going to be the same. The larger catastrophe was not something that could be prevented by avoiding a car accident or a gas leak. It was something far more fundamental. It was something that required me to experience the calls themselves in order to set in motion the sequence of events that the voice was trying to prevent. I became trapped in a loop the moment I answered that first call. Every conversation with the voice was another thread binding me to the future it was describing. And by the time it stopped calling, I had already done everything necessary to trigger whatever comes next. The people at the Pennsylvania State Police know this. Officer Harrison and Officer Reeves both know it. That is why the call file was sealed. That is why they refused to do interviews. They understood something about what had happened to me, something that I am only beginning to comprehend. There is a moment coming. I do not know when. I do not know what it is. But I know it is approaching with absolute certainty. I can feel it the way you can feel the electricity in the air before a terrible storm. And I know that when that moment arrives, I will understand exactly why the voice needed to call me. I will understand exactly why it was trying to warn me. And I will understand exactly why those warnings were always going to fail. The most unsettling, chilling truth is this. The voice was not trying to change the future. It was trying to accept it. Every call was a goodbye. Every prediction was a small surrender to something larger and darker and more horrifying than anything I could consciously imagine. The voice was me, reaching back through time, not to save myself, but to prepare myself for what was coming. And I am still waiting. I am still listening. And I am beginning to suspect that the calls may start again very soon. Listen carefully to the voices in your own life. Pay attention to the small eerie moments that do not add up. Notice the times when you seem to know something before it happens. Those are the moments when the barriers between different versions of reality are growing thin. Those are the times when something might be trying to speak to you from a future you cannot prevent. Because that is what happened to me in Pennsylvania. I became a conduit for a message from a timeline that was already written. And now I am terrified that the knowledge I have been given is itself the very thing that will trigger the horrifying future the voice was trying to warn me about. The danger is not the crash. The danger is not the gas leak. The danger is the understanding itself. The danger is knowing what is coming and being powerless to stop it. Pennsylvania is full of quiet places where nothing ever seems wrong, until it is. If you want more true horror stories like these, subscribe to Vesper Shroud. New stories every week, and some of them were never meant to be told.